The Dark Watchers have been a part of California folklore for centuries, with numerous sightings reported along the Santa Lucia Mountains. These mysterious shadowy figures, often described as tall, cloaked individuals wearing wide-brimmed hats, have intrigued and terrified hikers and locals alike. Tonight, we delve into a chilling story based on true events, sourced from accounts such as Legend of the Dark Watchers of California, and Tales of the Dark Watchers in California. Join us as we follow a man and his two friends who, after a deadly encounter with these enigmatic figures, find themselves relentlessly pursued by the Dark Watchers. What begins as a curious hike quickly descends into a living nightmare, making their lives a relentless torment. These people didn't realize it, but they just stepped into the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. I've always loved the outdoors. Growing up in a small town near California's Santa Lucia Mountains, I spent countless weekends hiking, camping, and exploring the rugged terrain. But one experience, a harrowing encounter I still struggle to comprehend, changed my relationship with those mountains forever. It was late September, just as the summer heat began to wane, giving way to cooler, crisper air. My friends, Will and May and I decided to take one last trip before the winter rains made the trails too muddy and dangerous. We planned a 3-day hike through a lesser-known section of the range, a path that promised stunning vistas and the solitude we craved. On the first day, everything went smoothly. We set up camp by a small, pristine lake nestled between two peaks. As night fell, we gathered around a fire, trading stories and enjoying the serene silence of the wilderness. Little did we know, our peaceful retreat was about to become a nightmare. The second day began early, with the sun just starting to peek over the horizon. We packed up and continued our trek, aiming to reach a high ridge that offered panoramic views of the entire range. By midday, we were deep into the forest, the dense canopy above blocking out much of the sunlight. That's when we first felt it, the unsettling sensation of being watched. I glanced at May and saw her furrowed brow.
Do you feel that?
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
Yeah.
Will replied, his eyes scanning the trees around us.
It's like we're not alone.
We tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to our imaginations running wild in the isolated wilderness. But as we pressed on, the sense of unease grew stronger. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt oppressive, as if the very trees were closing in on us. By late afternoon, we reached the ridge. The view was breathtaking, with rolling hills and valleys stretching out as far as the eye could see. We took a moment to rest, hoping the beauty of the landscape would dispel the eerie feeling that had been following us. As we sat there, I noticed something on a distant hilltop, a dark figure standing motionless against the sky. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I squinted, I could make out more details. The figure was tall and cloaked, its features obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. I nudged Will and pointed it out. "What do you think that is?" I asked. Will pulled out his binoculars and focused on the figure.
I don't know. Maybe another hiker?
May, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up.
It's not moving. And there's something off about it.
We watched for several minutes, but the figure remained perfectly still. Unease turned to dread as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. We decided to make camp a little further down the ridge, hoping to put some distance between us and the mysterious figure. That night, as we huddled around the campfire, the sense of being watched returned, stronger than ever. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, set our nerves on edge. May suggested we tell some ghost stories to lighten the mood, but each tale only served to amplify our anxiety. Eventually, we turned in for the night, though sleep was elusive. I lay in my tent, staring up at the fabric ceiling, every sound outside magnified in the stillness. Sometime in the early hours, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whispering. It seemed to come from all around us, the voices merging into an incomprehensible murmur. I crawled out of my sleeping bag and unzipped the tent, stepping into the cold night air. The campfire had died down to embers, casting a dim, flickering light. I saw Will and May standing by the edge of the camp, their eyes fixed on something in the distance. I followed their gaze and felt my blood run cold. The dark figure was back, closer this time, standing on the edge of the clearing. It was still as a statue, its features hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze, piercing and malevolent, boring into us. "We need to go," I whispered, my voice trembling. Will and May nodded, too frightened to argue. We quickly packed up our gear, moving as silently as possible. As we prepared to leave, I glanced back at the figure. It hadn't moved, but I could sense its presence, an oppressive weight pressing down on us. We hiked through the night, guided by the dim light of our headlamps. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees towering like silent sentinels. The whispering followed us, growing louder and more insistent. It was as if the very air was alive with voices, each one telling us to turn back, to give in to the darkness. By dawn, we were exhausted, but had put considerable distance between us and the ridge. We found a small, sheltered glade and collapsed, too tired to care about anything but rest. As I drifted off, I prayed that the figure wouldn't follow us. The third day was a blur of fatigue and fear. We moved as quickly as our tired bodies would allow, desperate to reach the trailhead and the safety of our car. But the forest seemed to conspire against us, the path twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. More than once, we found ourselves backtracking, as if we were caught in a maze. Late in the afternoon, we stumbled upon an old, weathered sign pointing to a ranger station. Hope surged through us, and we quickened our pace. But as we neared the station, the whispering returned, louder and more insistent than before. The ranger station was a dilapidated building, long abandoned. Windows were shattered, and the door hung off its hinges. But it was shelter, and at that moment, we needed to feel safe, even if it was an illusion. We entered the building and barricaded the door as best we could. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of decay. We found a corner to huddle in, our backs to the wall, and waited for the whispering to stop. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I woke to May's scream. My heart lurched as I saw her standing by the window, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. Outside, barely visible in the moonlight, were dozens of dark figures, their silhouettes stark against the night sky. They surrounded the station, motionless and silent, their eyes fixed on us. Will and I rushed to her side, but there was nowhere to run. We were trapped, the shadows closing in. The whispering reached a fever pitch, the voices merging into a cacophony of dread. In that moment, I knew we wouldn't escape. Those things had claimed us. The next morning, a search party found us, wandering aimlessly near the trailhead. We had no memory of how we got there, our minds a haze of terror and confusion. The rangers said we were lucky to be alive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a part of us had been left behind in those mountains. Days that followed our return were a blur. May, Will, and I were in a state of shock. We tried to rationalize what we had seen, but there was no logical explanation. Our friends and families were supportive, but I could see the doubt in their eyes when we recounted our story. To them, it was just a figment of our overactive imaginations, a product of exhaustion and fear in the wilderness. But we knew the truth. Those beings probably had marked us. I struggled to return to normal life. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Every whisper carried the ominous undertones of that dreadful night. May and Will fared no better. We kept in touch, bonded by our shared trauma, but our conversations were strained, haunted by the memories we couldn't escape. A few weeks later, I received a call from Will. He sounded frantic, his voice barely a whisper.
I saw one,
He said.
outside my window. I swear it was there watching me.
I tried to calm him down. but the fear in his voice was undeniable. We agreed to meet the next day, but Will never showed up. His parents reported him missing, and a search party was organized. Days turned into weeks, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. May and I were devastated. We clung to each other for support, but the fear was always there, lurking in the back of our minds. One night, as we sat in my living room, trying to distract ourselves with a movie, May suddenly froze. Her eyes were wide with terror as she stared at the window.
They're here.
She whispered. I turned to look and saw them. Dark figures standing just beyond the glass, their forms barely visible in the dim light. My heart raced as I grabbed May's hand, pulling her away from the window. We retreated to the basement, locking the door behind us. The whispering started again, a low, insistent murmur that seemed to come from the very walls. We stayed in the basement until dawn, too afraid to move. When we finally emerged, the figures were gone, but the fear remained. We knew we couldn't stay here. They had found us, and they wouldn't stop until they had claimed us all. Desperate for answers, I began researching similar cases to understand what were those things. I scoured old books, local legends, and obscure internet forums, searching for anything that might help us. Finally, I found what we were dealing with. People called them the Dark Watchers, ancient beings that had roamed these mountains for centuries, observing, waiting. Some said they were guardians, others claimed they were harbingers of doom. The stories were varied, but they all had one thing in common. Once the Dark Watchers marked you, there was no escape. I found accounts of hikers and campers who had seen the Watchers, felt their oppressive gaze. Some had gone missing, never to be seen again. Others had been found, wandering aimlessly, their minds shattered by the experience. The more I read, the more hopeless our situation seemed. One night, as I was poring over an old book in the local library, an elderly man approached me. He introduced himself as Thomas, a retired park ranger who had spent his life in the Santa Lucia Mountains. He had heard my story from one of the rangers who found us and had been looking for me ever since. Thomas told me that he had encountered the Dark Watchers once, many years ago. He had been on a routine patrol when he saw them, standing on a distant ridge. He felt their gaze, the oppressive weight of their presence, but he had managed to escape by sheer luck. He had spent his life trying to understand them, to find a way to protect himself and others from their malevolent influence. He believed that the Dark Watchers were ancient beings, tied to the land in ways we couldn't comprehend. They were neither good nor evil, but their presence was a harbinger of doom for those who saw them. He had found clues in old Native American legends and Spanish explorer accounts, but nothing concrete. The Watchers were elusive, their motives inscrutable. Thomas offered to help us, but his advice was grim.
There's no way to fight them,
he said.
The best you can do is avoid them. Stay away from the mountains. If they've marked you, you need to keep moving. Never stay in one place for too long.
May and I took his advice to heart. We packed up our belongings and left town, drifting from place to place, never staying more than a few days. But no matter where we went, the Watchers were always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Weeks turned into months, and our lives became a constant cycle of fear and flight. We lost touch with our families, our friends, everyone we had once known. The Watchers had taken everything from us, leaving us with nothing but our shared terror. One day, as we were driving through a remote part of Oregon, our car broke down. It was late afternoon, and the nearest town was miles away. We had no choice but to walk, hoping to find help before nightfall. As we made our way through the dense forest, the familiar sense of being watched returned. We quickened our pace, but it was no use. The whispering started again, the voices more insistent than ever. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the forest was plunged into darkness. We stumbled through the underbrush, our flashlights barely piercing the gloom. Suddenly, May stopped. She turned to me, her face pale and eyes wide with fear.
I can't do this anymore,
she said.
They're never going to stop. We can't keep running forever.
I tried to reassure her, but deep down I knew she was right. We were trapped in a never-ending nightmare, with no hope of escape. The Watchers would always find us, no matter where we went. As we stood there, surrounded by darkness, the figures emerged from the shadows. Dozens of them, their forms barely visible in the faint light. They closed in around us, their eyes gleaming with a cold, malevolent intelligence. We backed away, but there was nowhere to run. The Watchers formed a circle, trapping us in the center. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from the very earth beneath our feet. In that moment, I understood. The Watchers weren't just observers, they were hunters, and we were their prey. They had been toying with us, driving us to the brink of madness, savoring our fear. I held May's hand, and we faced the Watchers together. There was no point in running anymore. Our fate was sealed. The Watchers moved closer, their forms shifting and undulating in the darkness. The whispering reached a fever pitch, and I felt a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder. Everything went black. When I woke, I was alone. The forest was silent, the Watchers gone. May was nowhere to be found. I stumbled through the trees, calling her name, but there was no answer. She was gone, taken by the Watchers. I wandered for hours, lost and alone, until I found a road. A passing driver picked me up and took me to the nearest town. I was in a daze, barely able to comprehend what had happened. The police didn't believe my story. They chalked it up to a hallucination, a product of exhaustion and fear. But I knew the truth. The Watchers had claimed May, just as they had claimed Will, and it was only a matter of time before they came for me. I've spent the years since then in a state of constant vigilance, never staying in one place for too long, always looking over my shoulder. The Watchers are out there, waiting, watching, and I know that one day they will find me. When they do, I'll be ready. I won't run. I won't hide. I'll face them head on, and maybe, just maybe, I'll finally understand what they are and why they've chosen me. Until then, I live in fear, haunted by the whispering voices and the dark figures that lurk in the shadows. The Dark Watchers are real, and they're always watching. And if you ever find yourself in the Santa Lucia Mountains, remember this: if you see them, don't look away. Don't run. Because once you've seen the Dark Watchers, they never let you go. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. And if you have a story that's just as eerie or unsettling, don't hesitate to send it my way. I might just share it next time. This is Mr. Scary Guy saying, sleep well, if you can. Good night. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe by clicking the icon above. We've also got a playlist full of scary stories on your left side, and a suggested video you'll love on the right. Choose one and keep the scares going.